You're tuned in to RX Radio.
I know. I miss being in the studio with Lundy. That was
Way better.
Lundy. Yeah, Lundy, if you're listening, we miss you. We love you. I hope you still exist. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Myself, Jordan Jiunta, here with the one, the only Killian Hamilton today. Killian's had a ton of experience since the last time we've had him on the podcast in the strength and conditioning for actual sport. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to dive into that today. Really interesting topics lined up for you guys. But before we get there, just got to pay the bills real quick. If you guys are listening, we have the next class of level 1 starting on the 27th, so May 27th. If you guys haven't signed up and you're thinking about it, now is the time. You can sign up until the end of the 4th week, actually. I think it's a secret. I don't know if we've ever publicly said that. But hop in. We have 4 lectures. It's Killian, we have Jordan Shallow, Jorge's doing it, and I think Macintosh is on deck for this one as well.
So.
Yeah, so you guys will get access to 4 of the same lecture each week from 4 completely different perspectives. Like I said, Killian can approach this from the strength and conditioning for sport lens. Shallow's got a ton of experience in a lot of different ways. Macintosh, big in the hypertrophy space, as well as Jorge is, and kind of just the general training space. So you guys get a bunch of different perspectives on the same material. We have a lab. I think we're up to we have 7 a week. I don't know if we have one every day. I want to say, for some reason, I don't think we have one on Friday, but 7 labs per week. You guys will get access to the Prescript Collective, 24/7 access to all of our coaches in the collective worldwide that you can just talk through ideas. We have everything from business to training to programming to nutrition to whatever you need to talk about when it comes to being either a coach, whether that's online or in person. We have tons of resources, some of the best coaches in the world, people working at the highest levels in all different respects of strength, conditioning, training. So check that out. If you guys hop in, you'll get to have some lab time with myself and Killian and kind of talk through the stuff, live Q&As. So that kicks off on the 27th. If you want to sign in to make sure you're there for the first week of lectures live, now is the time. Enough of that. Welcome back, Killian. It's great to have you, man. It's been a minute.
Yeah, for sure, man. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. So we'll kind of dive in. Since we've had you on the podcast, you've been busy. You've been working. We kicked off the level 3. The first class was in January of this year, and that was a training camp for college football athletes preparing for the combine. If I'm not mistaken, I think the majority of the athletes that went through the camp got signed into the NFL. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we're up to, don't directly quote me on this, but it's roughly around 17 to 19, or I would say well above 90% of the participants have signed an active contract with the NFL.
That's unreal. Yeah. And just being in the room with these guys, seeing the way that they think about strength and conditioning. Some of them are just super, super intellectual about it. Some of them, it's just like, it's almost an afterthought. They're so athletic. And some of them, it's just like they're in a different world, for the better or worse.
Yeah.
But it's really cool to see the different personalities that come into that room. And I think the learning experience on my side, at least, was learning how to manage that, understanding how you have to communicate with these athletes, understanding the way you have to run a session. Everyone might be doing not necessarily the same workout, but a similar workout. But you look at different groups of 3-4 athletes at a time, and they're doing completely different things. You need to conduct yourself completely different. It's a lot of on your feet thinking, problem solving, and that's something that I was there for a few weeks of the camp, and it was a crazy experience for me. I know all of the coaches that came in and took the level 3, they got a lot out of it. But the difference is that you were there for what, 8 weeks?
13.
That's a different number, and that's a lot more.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you were there start to finish. You saw the whole thing through. So what was your experience? What were kind of some of the main takeaways that you got from that experience?
Well, yeah, I think that the first thing, I think you kind of mentioned it, and I think, it's probably talked about a lot, but not talked about enough. In particular, in the private sector of strength and conditioning or supporting athletes versus, say, working for an organization, although it's probably true for both, is, in the private sector, these athletes are coming to you oftentimes with very short timelines and hyper specific goals that are usually, not to make this, not to romanticize it, but in large ways, life changing, right? At the end of,
Yeah.
This 12 to 16 weeks, these players are going to have the opportunity to, step into a role that completely changes what their day-to-day looks like, and probably generationally will change what, their family in years to come gets to experience. So, right off the bat, these players are coming in and I think they're prepared to trust you, and they believe that the facility that you work for can get them results. But I think the first thing you need to do is honestly build a rapport with these guys. They've spent
Yeah.
Maybe possibly 4 years at an institution in a weight room with another strength and conditioning coach and staff prior to meeting you. They've probably had trainers on their own in the off season, and potentially have been through multiple facilities. And I think the first thing you need to do is be able to address and understand each individual on a human level before the programming inevitably ever matters to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely gotten hints of that as well, especially being there the first week and getting to do some of these assessments. The first thing you want to do is you want to build that trust. You need to build that buy-in and let them know, like, look, I'm not working for a team. I'm not working for a school. I'm here working for you. Like, my goal is to allow you to perform at your best, or do everything I can to help you to perform at your best. And that requires a lot of trust, because I think a lot of these players are coming from a place where they don't admit to pain. Like, pain is a word that doesn't exist. And that's something I learned really quick, is like, if you're asking them what they're feeling, what injuries they have, they're going to be very guarded around that, because that might mean, in their past, that might mean that they're not getting on the field, or they're not getting the chance to showcase their skills, which could be something that inhibits them from accomplishing that end goal of getting the NFL contract. So you really need to build that trust and be like, look, I'm not going to say shit to anyone. Like, I'm here to help you, and I want to help you learn what you need to do so that you can stay functional, and so that you can stay safe in this training process so you can get that contract. So I think that's a really, really good point, and that's something that it kind of goes unspoken when it comes to a lot of the ways that people think, or like you said, romanticize strength and conditioning for sport. They think of it at the highest level, and they think like it's glorious. It's not fucking glorious. Like, you're there to work. Like, you're just a piece of the process for them. And it's not about you, it's about them. So you need to lose the ego, swallow the pride, and do what you need to do to be able to build that relationship, so that there is that trust, and so that you can be the tool that they need you to be in that situation.
Yeah, I think, a big part of it is like, it comes down to, even the simplest things of like, knowing where, I hate to say kids, but like knowing where kids are from, like where did you grow up versus where did you play? What was the strength and conditioning environment that you came from? What are, some behaviors or beliefs that have been, nurtured into you through your time as an athlete? Like you said, it's kind of, a wantingness to hide pain, or to not admit to pain. There's, players I worked with that came from institutions that, would essentially have like a rank and order system to punish players for not achieving arbitrary goals in a weight room, from how much they squatted to how many pull-ups they could do. And, I think, at a collegiate level, early on, freshman, sophomore year, there's probably a lot of value to, I don't even want to say building some toughness, but, awarding hard work. You are dealing with, kids that are developing, and, instituting in them, maybe more militant practices is valuable. But when it comes to, being the piece of a puzzle that helps somebody, run a faster 40, or, run a better 5-10-5, or interview better at an interview, you have to switch from, I think, being an authority figure and making the weight room a place of, blood and sweat, into, instituting into kids. There's different intentions and qualities to things we do. We're not there to work to failure and absolutely kill ourselves. I don't think there's an intrinsic value in that when we're on a field or in a weight room 5-6 days a week with a short time frame. I think it's, having people understand RPE and auto regulation and what qualities an exercise brings out, and to, maybe move slower or move with more intention, where, college weight room is, for better or worse, probably just about getting as many places you can on that bar as many days a week as you can. And I'm not taking the value away from that or the benefit that it gives these kids, but exiting that system into a system like the NFL, it needs to, I think, be a different style of nurturing environment.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that, and I absolutely agree with that. I think the one thing that I've noticed the most is that a lot of these kids, and I call them kids because they're like, what, 20, 21 years old.
Yeah.
They're coming out of some sort of collegiate strength and conditioning program. And again, there's a level of prestige that's associated with that I don't necessarily think is deserved. I think a lot of it is it's how can we get these kids through a program so that we can get some sort of strength program to run or some sort of progression to run. And it's not necessarily well thought out, or it's not well programmed, or it's not necessarily designed with the specific athlete in mind. It's designed with the specific goal of getting all of these athletes through a program. So one of the things that I noticed, and like you hinted towards, it's not necessarily about just getting a hard workout or getting a good workout in. It's if you can switch the emphasis to a learning process and actually teach these kids some things that are individual to them, and the things, because every single kid that's walked in, it's torn ACL, MCL, it's meniscus, it's Achilles, it's labrum, it's fractured spine, there's so many injuries that you'll see. None of these kids walk in and they're just like in pristine condition, ready to go. So that means that there needs to be some sort of special regulations or special considerations around what they're doing in the weight room for each individual person. And you're not going to get that in some sort of, institutionalized systemic strength program. So I think the benefit that I saw in being in this one-on-one scenario with them is you can teach them things that are specific to them. And that's stuff that they can take with them, not necessarily things that is, you can't count on the program to account for that for them, right? So if you can teach them what they need to be doing outside of that, or modifications they can make within those movements or within that program, then that's something that they can take with them, and that can make a real difference around whether it's a 13-week training camp or whether it's, extending their career from 3 years to 5 years and getting that next contract. So I think that's the thing I found the most value in. They're really underserviced in that way. We're talking some of the best football players in the world, and they've never had someone talk to them about how they can use their hips better so that they can protect their lumbar spine. Or the thing that I've seen from my lens, at least, is because I approach this stuff with a very, very heavy rehab emphasis. There's all these kids come in injured, but the rehab process, you've seen it. Being in that building, you've seen it. It's standing on a Bosu ball, hitting a soccer ball with a tennis racket or some shit. And it's all this stuff that's, moderately helpful at best. And if you can teach them how to bridge the gap from, all right, standing on a Bosu ball and doing some sort of balance exercise or a banded glute exercise, to actually getting your foot on the floor and learning how to use your hip and protect your knee and move properly, and create better qualities to allow you to stabilize and move better, then they're going to be able to express that better on the field. They're going to be safer for a long period of time. So those are the things that I found from my lens that are really helpful in making this a learning experience, as opposed to making this a training experience. So I guess sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you a question. So in your experience, what does it look like kind of in that meeting an athlete to understanding their specific needs and also understanding the goals that you need to get them to accomplish? What does that process look like for you?
Yeah, I think, and I had the opportunity, I would say, a pretty, a really valuable opportunity, unique opportunity to not only work with College Combine, but towards the end of my tenure there this year, I also worked with some NFL vets, so returning pros in the off season, and I got to just have so many more discussions with very different personality types. Right, college players, like we spoke about, are very guarded and concerned about the future, and kind of just want to get to the combine or pro day and things like that. And you get pros in the off season, and the biggest thing I think I've learned, or I would say most people will learn about working with pro athletes, is it's literally an occupation. You talk to people that play pro football, and it's just essentially an office that they go to, and they just do a thing that ends up being on TV 3 nights a week. But to them, it's just a job, and they're coming in the off season like, I kind of got to get these things done so that I can go back and do my job again. It'd be no different than working with an accountant who's wrist or low back hurts at the end of the day. They're like, well, my work pays for this and I kind of want to get this fixed. So, a big thing is, the questions I would ask are rarely different from a college athlete to a pro. If I was just working with, some guy off the street, a lot of it's the same thing, What do you want to accomplish? Like, what are you coming in here with the goal of accomplishing? What does training look like in the past for you? What did you like about training? What did you not like about training? Especially at a collegiate or in an organizational level, it's like, what aspect of the rigidity of that program do you not want to do now? Like, now you're paying for this. What do you not want to do, or what did you not feel value in? A belief system around body weight or muscle mass and how it affects athleticism. I can't tell you how many athletes across multiple sports, almost completely unrelated sports, will tell you that being more muscular, having developed more muscular hypertrophy, limits their ability to be athletic. You'd have no idea, or maybe you would, but I think most people, who pride, hypertrophy on being this really important thing, you're going to learn really quick in strength and conditioning. You're probably the most useless person on staff. If your whole thing is like how to get someone's pecs bigger, you're going to be really useless in a couple weeks because nobody wants to get bigger. Every player I've ever worked with says, middle of the season, I get up to 235. I play my best at 215. Middle of the season, I get up to 215. I feel my best at 198. I don't want my upper body to get bigger because I feel like I can't run as fast. My chest got big and my lats got big and now I'm tight and I can't move. And, the first thing I think most people coming from a conventional or general training environment are going to do are going to want to argue how that's not true, right? Well, more muscle mass doesn't make you tight and whatever. It's like, sure it does. It's not the body. That's not the vehicle this person's used to driving. You know what I mean? If you took Lewis Hamilton, he could tell you the difference in tires on his car, right? You got to think about that. An F1 driver could sit in a car and go, I don't like these tires. I want these tires to be this diameter by this height by this depth. I don't want to race with these tires on, right? Or I don't like these brakes. These athletes are running around in an F1 car made of blood and meat and bones and water. And it's like, they'll know if it's not the right F1 car for them, So that's a big thing I've realized is like asking guys, what do you want to weigh when you play? Where do you feel your best? Do you want to put muscle on? Do you not want to be more muscular? What is it you need to accomplish? What didn't you like about the organization or institution you came from? And how can you best support that? The most dieseled, jacked individual you and I have ever seen our entire life was a guy who told me his best workouts were done with resistance bands in his basement.
Yeah. Insane.
And you look at him and he's 3 hours out from the Olympia stage, right? So it's like, you work with a guy like that and you're perplexed, right? He's benching over 400 pounds, he's deadlifting over 600 pounds. And he goes, I hate doing this. I'd rather just work out with bands in my basement or do oblique sling work on a GHD with a kettlebell. And it's like, man, you wouldn't think that had you not had that conversation. And, I would say, working with that athlete was probably, the pivotal moment in my experience at the facility in Tampa was sitting down with that athlete and going, how do you feel? What do you want to do differently? And then, spending a ton of hours, relearning my own thought process to be able to deliver something to this athlete that they would have, a high level of effort and consistency behind.
Yeah, that's unreal. And that's such a refreshing viewpoint to have on exercise because I feel like a lot of the internet, a lot of the things that I see, and I understand I live in my own echo chamber, but it is that hypertrophy, optimal, this is how you should work out kind of crowd, which is cool. Like if your specific goal is specifically hypertrophy, yeah, absolutely. But it doesn't always carry over. Hypertrophy does not mean athleticism. Hypertrophy doesn't even necessarily mean strength. Like there's a skill component to all of this, and that overrides any of these other specific qualities that you could train or adaptations that you can make. And it's the ability to put it all together. So I really enjoy that viewpoint, and it's something that, I'll be honest, you do the weirdest exercises on the internet.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I watch your stories and I'm like, all right, this is going to be weird. And I mean, I look at it, for multiple reasons. The t-shirts are an honorable mention, but I at least look at it through the lens of, all right, this is something I haven't seen before. What the fuck is Killian trying to accomplish here? And I know so I have an understanding of the way that you approach this stuff is that there's a problem. I need to solve the problem. How can I use the constraints of a med ball, GHD, a box, a hamstring slider, whatever, a safety bar, whatever it might be to solve the problem that I'm seeing. So I guess that's a question that I have towards you, is that in thinking about exercise in this way, you're solving a lot of problems in a lot of ways that might look weird to a lot of people. What is your thought process in approaching these things, and where does that root from? Is it from these conversations with the athletes? Is it common things that you see in specific sports? Is it movement patterns that you see being unaddressed? Like where's that thought process come from?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, because I would say if the person I was 4 years ago watched my Instagram stories today, I would definitely be sending them to you and like
This
just hating, you know what I
guy's
mean? Just
fucking
being
on
an
one.
absolute toxic person about what I do. But doing it's so interesting. Like doing what I do now, I think is the most exciting to me in a creative sense, and I think I now have the at least the adequate knowledge behind what I'm doing to I'm not saying this in a concise way, but I feel like I'm knowledgeable enough now that the creative or weird things I do, I understand why they could be beneficial. Whereas before, I think looking at them, I didn't understand a possible benefit to them because my own lack of knowledge. Like, I was just hammering screws in a wall, right? I didn't have a drill. Now I think I have a toolbox that just allows me far more tools. But yeah, like, how do I come upon the kind of weird exercises that I do nowadays, or different executions of exercises? And I think a big part of it comes from approaching the weight room as a support system for a specific task. So I strongly agree that you shouldn't be sport specific or task specific in the weight room. Like, no, you shouldn't hook a ball up to shouldn't hook a baseball to a cable machine. You shouldn't, swing a med ball like a hockey stick or any of those things, or put all the plates on one side of a barbell and swing it around. No, I don't agree with those things. I don't think we should be sport specific. But I think, I was talking about this with my girlfriend yesterday. I was saying, like, what I think a lot of people don't understand about strength and conditioning is that you have to be very well rounded. You have to have such a diverse, not only toolbox, but experiential box to pull from. And I think, a situation like the combine camp is a great example of it. I don't think there's a single weight room session, upper body, lower body, or otherwise, that didn't have in some way a direct goal of improving the 40-yard dash. And I think if any one of those weight room sessions we had wasn't directly correlated to improving the 40-yard dash, I think as a facility we would have failed the athletes. I think knowing that that's probably one of the number one things that's going to raise or lower the draft stock of these young athletes, I think it's imperative that you have a good enough understanding of what the 40-yard dash entails, sprint mechanics, how it feels, the positions we're trying to create or reinforce, and then understanding, a lot of the exercises that we execute, I don't think are executed with the initial intention of improving the strength or hypertrophy of an athlete. I think they're used as a plan B when an athlete can't stay on the field any longer. If I can't hit any more accelerations with an athlete, if I can't run any more 3.10s, if I can't pull any more sleds with an athlete, I want to be able to come in the weight room, find those same positions, and like you said, from a learning perspective or a learning approach, I want to be able to reiterate those positions again to that athlete. A high bar squat isn't going to be as useful to me in 12 weeks as a banded single leg hip extension drill or hip flexor drill. Like, in the limited time I have with an athlete who's relatively strong, I'm just trying to build more repetitions in the positions I need this athlete to get good in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in seeing it unfold, I do understand that. I think looking at it from the outside, it's a little bit hard to draw those lines. It's a little
100%.
bit hard to see the correlation between that. You said that everything we do in the weight room is to improve the 40-yard dash. Now, looking at that from maybe just I want to even say a strength and conditioning lens, but just a strength training lens. I think a lot of people get stuck in that very linear progression of, not necessarily a linear progression of load, but a linear progression of adaptation. Like, I need to build strength with this, or this workout needs to progress on the last workout. And I think that's for its purpose in general population and most of training, that's a fine way to look at training. But I don't think you can necessarily look at it the same way in this scenario, because you have a very concentrated time to execute on some very specific goals. So it's not necessarily a linear improvement or like step loading progression or something of the sort. It's you kind of take what you can get when you can get it. And it's that might change day to day. The thing that I noticed being in that facility was probably the single most important thing in terms of progression, as in a general sense, was load management, is understanding when you can push where and when you cannot, or when you should not. So from the outside looking in, again, through that perspective, looking at, a banded hip flexor march, or like a lateral sled pull, or like a B stance, concentric safety bar quarter squat, something of the sort, is like, why are we doing this? This isn't something that we can necessarily progress on week over week. So speaking to someone that might look at it through that lens, how would you describe progression over the course of this camp? Because it's not necessarily this thing where we did this last week, so we're going to try and do a little bit more this week in terms of volume or in terms of intensity. It's very much like understanding the adaptation that we can train in the moment and being able to take that as far as we need to take that in that session. So what is your approach on that, or what is your rationale around that in terms of actually outlining what the training should be for a specific athlete?
Yeah, so I think as much it's going to change, athlete to athlete, and some people are going to need something more than others, and whatnot, and there'll be differences. I think the big thing is building, say, a combine camp, and where the 40-yard dash kind of becomes the centerpiece to it. It's understanding where athletes are at day one as they enter the camp in terms of their ability to properly train for the 40-yard dash, where they get to in the middle of the camp in terms of what training looks like for the 40, specific to what we do on the field or the track, and then where they're at in the end as they kind of taper into either pro day or the combine or both. It's understanding that what we're doing in the weight room is just supporting or facilitating either the training to come or the training that's happening concurrently. So early on at the combine camp, guys aren't spending that much time on the field. They're probably running on the track, which is a little bit more forgiving of a surface than, say, the turf will be. They probably don't have cleats on. We're probably afforded more volume, not even necessarily intensity, but we're probably afforded greater volume in the weight room, in particular eccentric volume, because we're not getting as much eccentric load as ground times that are as long as turf. We're not coming out of a three-point stance. We're not kind of concentrically exploding into the race or the event. We're dealing a lot with kind of transferring load into the track. Ground contact times are a lot quicker. They're absorbing less eccentric force early on. They're moving slower. They're more upright. So in the weight room, that's a great opportunity in the weight room to build those eccentric capacities to either yield to force or be strong. For athletes that aren't strong, that's their time. Like, this is where we're going to get them strong, and we actually have a very limited amount of time where we can truly build strength or neurological capacity in these kids to then support what they're about to do on the turf. But you need to know that that's where it's going. So understanding the progression exists in the 40-yard dash training. The progression doesn't exist in the weight room. What you're doing is you're anticipating what the progression is going to be. You're going, okay, in 3 weeks, the time spent on the turf is going to increase. That means longer ground contact times. Players are going to need to be stronger. They're also going to be moving at higher velocities. Well, that means the weight room now needs to prepare these kids to be, quote unquote, durable enough to now withstand the next 4-week block of sprinting. So it's like, okay, now I know that's what I'm doing in the weight room. But once we get into the field, once we get into the turf and we start seeing an increase in ground contact time, an increase in velocity, and harder training sessions, well, now the script has to flip in the weight room. I can't be eccentrically loading kids with long ground contact times and maximal efforts and these kind of long durations of yielding events. I need to go the opposite way. I need to be concentric, short ground contact times, explosiveness, kind of maximal contractions that'll hopefully prepare for that sprint session, but not take away from it in terms of soreness or exacerbating any risk people may have. So I think you can kind of continue to extrapolate that idea of the progression exists on the turf or on the field, and what we do in the weight room is either like a preemptive approach hopefully always a preemptive approach to what we do next on the field.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And the thing that I like there is it's a very different way at indexing exercises. A lot of times we'll think about body part, we'll think about plane of movement, we'll think about modality, but it seems like you're indexing around eccentric load versus concentric load. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the relationship would be, so you're on the track, you're going to have a more firm ground surface, which is going to allow you to be more efficient in transferring force, so lower ground contact time, meaning that it's going to be more of an eccentric bias movement as opposed to being on the turf, a softer surface, longer ground contact time, which means that you're spending more time in the eccentric phase of the movement. And that's the way that you're segmenting the way that you're going to complement what they're doing on the track or the field in the weight room. Did I get that correctly?
Yeah, you're 100% correct, right? So yeah, I'm going to need a greater eccentric or yielding capacity on a track surface, a mondo surface, because it gives back to the athlete more. So as I'm putting force into the ground, I'm going to need to be able to yield to that force because it's giving it back to me equal or greater. When I get onto the turf, it's giving me nothing. I actually need an ability to overcome or create concentric power to create that velocity because I'm not getting anything out of that surface quality itself. But in order to do that, you have to have a huge base level of strength, right? In order to express power, we need to be maximally strong first. Power doesn't come from a place where strength doesn't exist first, so
I
we
love
need to
that.
set that up.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I love that idea. And this is just me kind of clowning on everyone on my internet feed, is that you have these people that are like, I don't know, 145 pounds training power or training power output. But exactly like you said, power is an adaptation that comes after strength.
Yeah.
Like you're never going to be powerful if you're not strong. So there needs to be a level of strength that's established before you can express it as power. And that, as we've talked about on this podcast in the past, there's like the strength or the force velocity curve is that first you need to be able to produce force, and you're going to do that slowly before you can produce force quickly, which is power. So that's, I mean, not to interrupt, but that's a really good idea, and I think that's that line of thinking or that way of indexing exercise is a really powerful lens to look at this through, because it almost defies conventional strength and conditioning or strength progression, right? It's not necessarily this nicely organized linear thing. It's more fluid, dynamic, and you can fit it into a mold when you have the overall progression. Is that okay? Weeks 1 through 4, it's going to be just on the track. Maybe weeks 4 through 8, it's going to be on the track and the field, and then 8 on, it's going to be on the field. So you're understanding that, okay, as we go through this progression, there's going to be a greater demand for eccentric load in the way that they're expressing that power on the field. So there needs to be a lesser demand for eccentric load in the weight room so that they can manage load appropriately. So that's a newer idea to me, at least, and I think a lot of people listening, that's something that they probably haven't wrapped their head around yet. But in kind of going through that, you also mentioned this word that I've seen you bring up more and more lately, and that's durability. So can you expand on that and what that means to you?
Yeah. So I think when we look at, I would say like three words that maybe get misused or misrepresented sometimes. We think of like durability, resiliency, and longevity, right? And I think all of these things, for the most part, we can make an argument that you can't necessarily prepare for or reduce injury risk, right? Like it's injury risk management, I would say. It's not injury prevention. I think everybody in the industry kind of agrees on that at this point. When we talk about durability, I think the big thing that I think of when I talk about durability is I think for managing for non-contact injury. Like, can we make an athlete that's robust enough from a structural level, from a neurological level, to a functional level, in terms of the way they choose to move, that we're creating an athlete that's durable or robust enough to just manage for like, man, the bumps and the bumps and kind of the ability to get banged up in training, because in performance it's going to happen. And I think that's something a lot of people who maybe aren't athletes or don't work with athletes or don't understand athleticism don't understand, is like performance is painful, performance sucks, performance is uncomfortable, and it's like you're always walking the line of anything could happen when you essentially step onto the field and whatnot. So in terms of durability, I think it's understanding understanding the high demands or high intensities of sport or athleticism, and understanding, how can we start to quantify and expect or anticipate these harsh, collisions that athletes go through, and then at least manage for as much of it as we can. Like a contact injury, we're never going to be able to manage for. But I think, as strength and conditioning coaches and clinicians and practitioners, we can at least start to manage for or understand better non-contact injuries. Hamstring tears outside of contact, ACL tears outside of contact, any number of, soft tissue injuries that athletes go to. A lot of times, if we see them in training outside of contact, it was something we either didn't prepare for in training, didn't manage for in the way we executed the training we had written, or in real time, didn't mitigate for with load management or otherwise. So I think when I talk about durability, it's starting to not shy away from collisions and harsh, violent environments, but it's starting to bring those in a very controlled way into a weight room, because we're inevitably going to deal with them somewhere else anyways.
Interesting. So I guess my question to you based off the backs of that is, what does that look like in terms of training? How can we prepare someone to have better durability in these non-contact injuries?
Yeah, and I think a big aspect of that for me, comes down to, again, like probably stuff that you see me, maybe do in my stories or on Instagram or talk about. And I think it's getting away from the optimal approach of training and constantly looking at, resistance profiles and machines and exercise selection that, caters to or biases these muscles to work well, or to create, tension in a safe environment, or tension in a progressive environment, and start to understand, what is a collision in sport look like, right? What does ground contact look like to an athlete? What is the exponential times body weight that an athlete absorbs for as they, accelerate out of the blocks? Or, what does someone's, shoulder, hip, their core, their spine go through in training? And are we able to introduce those, positions or collisions in training in a way we can manage for? So I think, that looks like isometrics, oscillations, impulses, and none of these are my idea. I think they've always existed, and they do exist. A number of people, I think I would say, are my contemporaries or peers, utilize these in all different ways, and I borrow and steal from everybody like everybody else does. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting idea to think about. Is there an aspect of training or a portion of training that could be dedicated to improving a player's structure? Obviously we're not orthopedic surgeons. I can't go in and change the way people's bones and joints look, but I can look at adaptations I can make in training that are more structurally driven than they say are functionally driven, right? Like the hip airplanes of the world and the B stance RDLs of the world, like they have a place. The curl ups of the world have a place, and I think that's great, and that addresses one side of this argument, and that's great for normal people or bodybuilders, maybe even powerlifters, but for someone who's going to run 4.340 and get hit by somebody who's 260 pounds, that's a violent collision that needs to be managed for differently, right? There's a level of impulse and structure that needs to be conditioned to that response.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And something that I've been putting a lot more in my training program since I've seen you doing that, I've been playing around with them, are definitely isometrics. I haven't ventured much into the impulse stuff and some of the other things that you've been doing. I've found a ton of value in isometrics. First off, in learning potential, I think it's a really good way to get people to understand how they can stabilize a position out of necessity. Right? It's not something I'm going to tell you. It's something that you're going to have to seek out and find on your own, because we're going to spend a lot of time here. And if you don't find an efficient way to do it, you're not going to be able to do it. Aside from that, yes, the structural implications of that, like tendon health or understanding how to create stability at specific joint angles, I've found a ton of benefit in that. So I think there's a lot of benefit in doing those things. The one thing I don't understand as much, so I'm going to have you help me understand, impulse training. Can you tell me the rationale on that and what it looks like and how that's implemented into a program?
Yeah, so I think what I like about impulse training, or what I choose to understand about it and why I implement it, is I think with impulse training, it allows for an extremely high frequency of maximal collisions at a specific joint angle, where eccentric load and honestly concentric load aren't present. So, if I want my rotator cuff or my hip or my knee or my ankle to go through a high frequency of collisions, possibly preparing or conditioning me from a structural level for a certain task, I'm able to do so without having to afford also a tremendous amount of eccentric or concentric load, which would obviously create a need for more recovery, limit the volume I could train them at, also extend the amount of time training. I could do 25 internal rotations with my shoulder at a super maximal level, through impulse with, say, a toe strap, where I would be, limited to probably 1/4 of those if I were to use a cable or a dumbbell or something else in which there's an eccentric and concentric time value attached, where a toe strap, I can sit here and do this as quickly as possible at a super high velocity, and I could get 25 done in, 40 seconds. That's going to take me a lot longer when eccentric load is present. And then there's also, the tissue damage or mechanical challenge of eccentric load, where really what I'm trying to condition my arm to is just snapping here from a neurological level and creating that maximal collision at that end range, which I could then manipulate what that end range might be for someone.
Interesting. So it's almost a neurological adaptation to be able to deal with a collision at specific joint angles and ranges of motion. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100%. So, I think in a hyper violent environment, it's driving the same idea as, a hip airplane or a 90-90 stretch might, where it's like, okay, I'm accessing a range of motion my nervous system's not entirely confident with, but now I'm entering it multiple times or a high frequency of times with a maximal velocity, and my body's getting conditioned to being safe there. And now I can enter that in a different environment. I'm not going to have that same muscular neurological inhibition to entering that range or entering that range at a velocity.
Interesting. Yeah. So you're really just building the capacity to deal with that sort of velocity at that specific joint under those specific variables.
Exactly.
So explain this to me. I guess in terms of quantifying this, I've seen what I believe to be a fish scale, something you would hang a fish from to weigh it. Am I far off here? Am I off base?
No. So, where is it? Yeah, I have two. So I have one. It's an industrial crane scale.
Crane. Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So I have an industrial crane scale. That's from Amazon. That's just from Amazon. I think it was like $40 or $50. Anybody can buy one. The problem is, in order to use the industrial crane scale, you need a partner to read out what it says.
Gotcha.
So I bought this thing, and I'm going to plug it, and they don't pay me any money, nor did they ship this on time. But Tindeck, I was told to buy one of these. I think they're, let's call them Norwegian. I don't know where these guys are, Tindeck. If you ever listen to this podcast, I'm sorry. But this is really cool. It's Bluetooth. It hooks up to my phone. It has like a dozen different readouts I can create: peak force, repeated force, rate of force production, all kinds of interesting metrics that you can track with it. But yes, I use some type of dynamometer with impulse training and with overcoming isometric training. And now I'm sure there's someplace on the internet where you could find baseline measurements for all these things. But essentially what I really like using this for is in a game day minus model or otherwise being able to look at recovery and preparedness of an athlete. So, I think in one way, maybe we could look at long-term progression and adaptation of somebody by being able to measure their bilateral mid-thigh pull, single arm mid-thigh pull, knee extension, knee flexion, external rotation. It goes on, abduction, internal rotation, and adduction. We can measure all these things. And maybe it would show progression. But I think where it's entirely useful is being able to categorize and index, 24 hours out from game day, 24 hours post-game, 48 hours post-game, and kind of get these measurements. So it's like a day before a game, I can grab all these measurements from an athlete. 24 hours after the game, I can grab these measurements from an athlete. 48 hours after a game, which would probably be around when the first weight room session is going to occur. In a larger aspect, I could grab these measurements again, and I could see the recovery post game of an athlete from this, and I could see the preparedness pre game from an athlete based on this. Neurologically, what peak amount of force are they able to create? Neurologically, how quickly can they create that peak amount of force? Structurally and functionally, how much force can they resist? And I think those things are really, really interesting in strength and conditioning and in coaching to be able to track, because you can start to see, like you spoke about earlier, in say a combine camp. You were at the facility in Florida, and imagine every squat rack had one of these, and Monday morning, 7 a.m., all the athletes walk in and they run through 8 tests on Monday morning. Their program is written off of how they score on these 8 tests. Friday afternoon, we test them again after their last workout. Based on how they score, we begin to preemptively write the workouts for next week based on how much they prepared. What volume do we need to use with them? How much field time? How much weight room time? What's the upper body versus lower body volume look like? What's concentric to eccentric exercise selection going to look like? So I think for me, like you said, with the style of training or the approach to training I take now, I think there's a lot of subjective creativity that exists, but, having something like a dynamometer allows me to start to create this, a joint angle index of recovery and preparedness. And then I can regulate my training week to week. I can go, man, I got really beat up lower body wise this week as my turf time increased. I'm going to cut out upper body volume because my, knee flexion score dropped, 10 pounds or something, So I think there could be possibly, large amounts of benefit to utilizing a tool like this on a weekly basis or in season and off season at something like a combine camp.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like the idea that that's something that you could get real-time data around, and you could plot that, and you could see how it plays out against whether it's game day recovery or actual training over the course of a camp. And it's real-time data, which you can make adjustments based off of.
Yeah. And I think, for myself, looking at it for myself, going into another year of, say, a combine camp or off-season work with the NFL or otherwise, I think for me now, it would be almost a non-negotiable. Like, this is a Monday, Friday. I don't see why it would hurt a program. And I think, it could only make the decisions better next time if this just becomes a non-negotiable on Mondays and Fridays. We get these numbers from players, and we're able to sit down as a team and have better discussions with something to lean back on, inter-department wise.
The thing that I like about that is it's a relatively low stress, relatively I don't want to say simple, but it's a very realistic metric to take. Like, it's something that is very applicable as well. It's not necessarily like some Whoop score or something that's kind of built off of some proprietary algorithm that you don't really know. It's just real-time data on their ability to, or their capacity to buffer force at a specific joint. And no matter the underlying cause of that, like, you can infer things after the fact, yeah, but you can actually make adjustments in the workout that are appropriate for them to get the stimulus that's needed to continue to progress towards the goal, but it's not necessarily going to be a harmful stimulus in the moment.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think, like you said, you can't trust the conversations you have with professional athletes.
Right.
And all of us on a different level are going to have our own biases. So having something like that, that's just so, low fatigue rate. And it's like, okay, here's a number, like, this guy can't flex his knee this week, like, that's obviously something we're going to need to do next week. And, if on Monday he was doing it, 1.8 times the force we have on Friday, that's a concern that we need to bring interdepartmentally and go, well, what happened here this week, and why, and what do we need to do on our end, and what's the discussion we have to have with the player going into next week.
Yeah, unreal. Yeah, I think that's a really cool metric to be able to read. I guess my question then, in terms of impulse training, is what does that look like through the course of a training session? Is that something that you want first thing as you get in the gym? How are you going to implement that? And, like, what's in terms of volume, duration, like, where does that lie in the organization of a day?
Yeah, so I've seen people around me who utilize impulses, use them, up to 100 reps in a session, or hundreds of reps over the course of an entire day. Now, I wouldn't say I'm so married to those ideas as much as I I would rather have short bouts of high volume impulses right before I start the main work of a session. So, like I do my warm up, I come in, I do, ground based mobility, I do, band assisted mobility, I do a couple stability drills, maybe I do an ISO, maybe I do something ballistic or more dynamic. And then right before I start training, I'm going to hit that impulse right before I go into training, because it allows me to get to that maximal muscular contraction or that max velocity at a specific joint angle or position prior to getting into a workout that might require a high velocity at that joint angle, right? So, if I'm going to go into, say, a session where guys might be, hitting a bunch of power cleans or hitting a bunch of snatches from their hip or trap bar pulls, maybe I hit a ton of shoulder IRs in an impulse scenario. I just have guys lay down and just IR the shit out of their shoulder with the toe strap, and then hop into a session and like you're just primed to fight the shit out of that bar, you know what I mean? And ER before a bench press, and it's like you're able to fight on the way down, and you're just, there's the joint angle specific adaptation of the ability to stabilize and prepare for collision. But then there's also just a global neurological stimulus of just being aggressive, and it's like, It goes back to, what you and I talked about before we hit record. I think impulses allow you to check that box of like, did I warm up hard enough? It's like, dude, I'm trying to rip this toe strap in half when I do these. And, I was in a gym in Miami that I go to a lot. My friend Rob owns Croqueta, and he sets aside essentially all the old cable handles for me. And I sit there and I just do impulses till I break these handles, and that's when I'm ready to train. So, I think it really checks that box of like, are you prepared to do the next thing, which might be a really aggressive movement that you're not prepared for otherwise, right? I don't know if I could hit a max high hang clean, just from, doing a couple single leg RDLs and saying, all right, well, I'm ready to go. I don't think that's enough.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point in terms of warming up. I think a lot of people still, like we've spoke a lot on this over the years, but like your warm up should be progressive, and it should hand off in a very fluid way to the main lift of the day or the main stimulus that you're trying to accomplish. It's not just I do a bunch of airplanes or I do a bunch of kettlebell windmills and then I go and bench press or I do hang cleans or whatever it might be. It's you need to progress the stimulus of the warm up to the extent that it's going to hand off to where you start your warm up sets for that main exercise for the day. So I think the emphasis of trying to break shit in the gym should be something that a lot of people should take away from this. It's not that I'm just going to go do a few sets of whatever and now I'm ready to go. It's no, you need to be ready to go before you're ready to go. And I think that's a really good message to take away from this as well.
Yeah, and I think, one thing that I've experienced in more than one facility when it comes to training pro athletes or otherwise, just in strength and conditioning in general, is there's either no time or no belief in like quote unquote feeder sets or warm up sets. You roll around on the ground for a bit and it's like, okay, what weight do you want for your first set of squats? And like the first set of bench press and squat is sometimes 2 plates on the bar in these facilities. Like no one's I've never seen an empty bar used for a warm up set of a single thing in my time in a professional sports facility.
Yeah. So I guess then the idea would be using velocity as a way to bridge the gap between nothing and intensity.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Where it's like then that paints, like you said, the force velocity curve. On one side, we have, absolute strength. On the other side, we have max velocity. If I know these guys are going to go from, rolling their pec and doing, banded Robin Hoods to getting on a bench with, 185 to 225, I need to bridge that gap, and having somebody come over and hit a bunch of internal rotations is at least going to prime their nervous system enough at a joint angle that needs to be stable for them to unrack that bar, be able to, create a strong muscular contraction, be able to yield to this force and, compete against the weight of that bar, and at least be a little bit closer to a good environment. It's not the best environment, but it's a lot better than going, lax ball, pec stretch to 225 bench press.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my biggest objection that I haven't tried these yet is that it just kind of looks like you're jerking off in the gym. But, after this conversation, I might give it a try. The impulses, not the jerking off in the gym.
I mean, I do train at a locked gym. You know, I haven't done an impulse in a public gym yet. I don't know
Yeah,
if I would.
that's fair.
But it all depends. You know what I mean? Like 25 tugs of anything has never been bad.
Tugs. I don't think I've ever used the word tugs talking about exercise before.
That's what it is. I'm just gonna start programming that 25 shoulder tugs.
Max effort.
Yeah,
Shoulder
25
tugs.
pelvic tugs before I start.
I mean, we did good. We got 55 minutes in before we made a dick joke.
Yeah. Better than what we do in real life, you know.
Absolutely. This is sick, man. I think this is a really good way to look at training for an athletic population. This gave me a lot of insight into the reasons that you make the decisions that you make around training. And I think anyone that listens to this, if they go back and they look at the exercises you're doing, they'll make a lot more sense. And it all seems like it's working from the problem backward and then understanding, having a deeper understanding of the adaptations that you're trying to make or the stimulus that you're trying to elicit. Right. Like I think a really valuable idea is categorizing exercises in that way of eccentric versus concentric, and understanding that, it's not just progression in terms of load, progression in terms of volume. It's progression in terms of specific qualities at a joint level that are going to help this person perform in the way that they need to perform and keep them safe, build durability in a way that's going to, again, keep them safe outside of contact, or in positions that they're going to have to produce a lot of force, have to be very powerful in. And you want to give them the capacity to express that power in the way that they need to, not necessarily in a way that could be harmful.
Yeah, and you know, I think at the end of the day, you know, all of my experiences so far, you know, with professional athletes, you know, on the floor in person in a facility is, you know, like you just said, rarely is there almost an intended goal until you're hands on with that person figuring it out. You know, the best program I could write is the worst program I could execute if I haven't already, you know, moved around with that person and seen them move. And yeah, you know, I think a lot of what you realize when you work with athletes is it just goes back to that idea, right? Of like, you can't argue why something works and why something doesn't work. You have to listen to the athlete and then be able to cater to what they believe works, you know, whether it be bands or ISOs or just running. You know, you're going to inevitably have to bend to the will of that athlete and what they're willing to commit to. Especially in the private sector, you know, you're not there to yell at people and force ideologies down their throat. You know, you're there to support these guys and you know, have fun with them and, you know, make sure they're in the position to get paid.
Unreal. Yeah, that's sick. I love it. Some big takeaways from today for sure. I appreciate you being here, Killian. If you guys
Yeah,
want to hear more from Killian, check him out on Instagram, Killian.Hamilton.
that's
He
right.
does some weird shit, but it's worth looking at. He'll be teaching this semester at level 1. So again, registration is live. It will be live for the next few weeks, but lecture 1 goes off Monday, the 27th. So hopefully we'll see you guys there. Killian and I will be in the labs. We'll get to talk to you, interact a bit. Appreciate you guys for listening today, and Killian, I appreciate you for sharing.
Thanks a ton. All right.
For sure.